the Valley High North Laguna Library, for helping us organize this and put it together. So can we give everybody a round of applause? Thank you. Alhamdulillah. Real quick, I would like to let you guys know the order of events for tonight. Brother Khaled, can you wave? That's Brother Khaled right there. One of our 5 pillars. Alhamdulillah. The first thing that we're going to get into is, that's a video of Dr. King. So once I'm done speaking and everything, we'll show a video. After that, our guest speaker, John Tyler, will come up and speak about Dr. King. After that, we will have an intermission, about 20 minutes, and then follow up by a video of Malcolm X, and then our Amir, where's he at? He's not here. Amir Abdel Malik. He will be speaking about about Malcolm X. After that, we will have question and answers, and then we'll have our social hour where we can get some cookies. We got some really good Thin Mints. Girl Scout season is here. Alhamdulillah. So once again, could we get a round of applause for yourselves for coming? Thank you, because you guys could be at home relaxing on a Saturday evening. Instead, you're coming out here to join us. One thing I would like to bring to notice to Mr. Taylor is that he's been married for 30 years. 5 children. Yes. I don't know about you guys. For me, my personal opinion, that's the greatest accomplishment any man can have. And women, let's not forget about his wife. Mr. Taylor has a BA in business management. He has a master's in economics, and he serves on the board from Civil Service Management for the state of California. He's a board of director of the St. Hope Public School, which is located in Oak Park. That's where I grew up. He is on the board of directors for Zeta Beta Lambda Foundation. He is an active member of the Sacramento's Mayor's Stand-Up Initiative Program. Okay. Also, he is the co-founder of the Alpha Academy Youth and Parent Mentoring Program, Brothers of Kamba. Kahumba. Alhamdulillah. It's a rites of passage for middle school boys, which we really need that, alhamdulillah. He also is a co-founder of the Concerned African American Parents Advocate Group of Elk Grove. She's been married for 30 years. That's about, yes, family. He's a co-president of the annual African American Young Males Conference with the 101 Black men of Sacramento for the past 15 years. Alhamdulillah, that is great. Once again, could we get a round of applause for Mr. Taylor?
The speeches. As I was studying and preparing for tonight, those 3 speeches really resonated for me, particularly the how long, not long. And I think, as Alima shared with you in my introduction, who I am and what I do, one of the things recently, a brother gave me an award. So for those of you not familiar with the MLK Memorial that was built in Washington, D.C., they made a small replica of that memorial and gave that to me. And one of the things it says on there, we are faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. And Dr. King said that in 1967. So I share that with you now because, like I told Brother Rashid, I'm not really an entertainer. I'm an activist. So in other words, the things that you guys seen about Dr. King and what you'll probably see later about Brother Malcolm X, there are many of us that are still doing that right now. And I really appreciate the fact of the time. I don't know about any of you in the room that have a chance to do presentations, but many times you're rushed. You get 5 minutes or 10 minutes to talk about whatever the issue is. But when Brother Rashid said 45 minutes, I felt real comfortable. I said, so I got a lot to say and a lot to share with you all, but I brought my easel board because I like to write as well as I kind of preach and teach going forward. So as she said, you know, just real general, I am a child of God, as I believe many of you in this room are as well. I'm a male, I'm a man. And then lastly, I am a black man. And so with those three issues or essences of who I am, this is what I'm going to speak to as it relates to my brother, Dr. King. But as we go through the outline, the first thing, and since there are young people in the room, I want you to always remember the 5 W's. I learned this from the Panthers back when I was a kid in Los Angeles. You always got to know the 5 W's. Who, what, why, when, where. Those are the 5 fingers. So when you seen the brothers putting their fists like this, you didn't know about the 5 W's that they talked about. But when they close their fist, it's the how. That's what black power is. You got to know the 5 W's, and then once you know that, then you put up your fist and how, and we'll explain to you that as we go forward with today's presentation. So with that kind of overview and outline, as I thought about the 45 minutes, I thought about how do we talk about Brother King and all that he's done in 45 minutes? So I figured, okay, the best way to do that is to break it up into 15-minute increments. We need to first talk about his character. Who is he? And how did he become who he was? We need to put things in context. What was the time that he was living? What had happened before he came into the world, and what allowed him or inspired him to do what he did? And then that is, in fact, what then represents the content. So those are the 3 things that I want to cover for you today. Now, his character. Now, many of you may have taken psychology, and I think it's important, again, because I think as we talk in sessions like these, we need to make sure we're clear on what's going on. Everybody is composed of these 3 essences: your biology, your environment, and your perception. Your biology is, in my case, I'm black. My hair is somewhat thin. My pigmentation is, you know, what it is. I'm a certain height, I'm a certain weight. And everyone in this room has a biology from your ancestors and from your parents. Dr. King's the same case. His environment, where did he grow up? Dr. King was born in 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. 1929, Atlanta, Georgia. 1929 in the deep south of America. Segregation. In 1929, when Dr. King was born, there were 100 reported lynchings of black people just in Georgia. We don't want to talk about Mississippi, Alabama, South and North Carolina, Texas, Louisiana. In Georgia alone, in the year he was born, 100 black people were lynched. And we're not talking about just hanging from a tree. We are talking about people that were literally set on fire in some cases. Literally set on fire for the entertainment of people in that community. He was born in that year, in that place. Some other things about his environment. His father was a pastor, preaching the gospel. His mother was the daughter of a pastor who preached the gospel, and that's Baptist. So he grew up in a very strong Christian-orientated household, but in a very racially segregated environment. Both of his parents were educated. Both were college educated. His father went to Morehouse and got a degree in theology, divinity, or whatever. His mom got her degree from Spelman in teaching. So both parents, college educated and both professional. Now, something I learned that I didn't know before I was going to come to talk with you all tonight was his mother had to quit working. Because in the South, in Georgia, a woman who was married had to stop working, especially a teacher. You were a female teacher in Georgia, you had to quit your job. So think about that. Here you had a sister who grew up with a Baptist minister, went to Spelman, got her degree in education, then she was a stay-at-home mom. So can you imagine when Martin would come home with his homework, what do you think Mom did? They didn't have TVs then, so clearly she couldn't say, you know, boy, turn that TV off and come do your work. But you gotta believe that his mother was on him every day to do his work. And his father, being a Baptist minister in this environment, again, reinforces that education. But here's something else that's interesting in terms of his character and his background. His grandfather, his mom's dad, became the main pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. 1894. Atlanta had 40% black folks in that time. Thousands of black businesses at that time. His grandfather was the leading minister in that area at that time. That is his background. His father then took over in 1931 from from his wife's dad to pastor the same church. And he pastored this church until I think it was like 1970 something, somewhere around there. So for 40 years, Dr. King Sr. was the minister of the same church that Reverend Williams, which was Dr. King's grandfather, was a church. So that's almost 100 years of leadership. Now, those of you in the mosque or the church, if you have that kind of connection, that kind of network of people for that amount of time, when you get up and say, we're going to the Valley High Library, this place would be packed. You know what I'm talking about? And in addition to that, Martin's dad, well, think about this. Let me just straighten this out real quick as we go forward. He was originally Michael King, Dr. King's dad, Michael King. Somewhere in the 30s, he decided to go to Germany, and that's another issue that I'll talk about in a minute as we get further in the conversation. But he went to Germany, saw something about some German named Martin Luther. I don't really know a lot of history about Martin Luther, but nevertheless, he was inspired. So Michael King, Martin's dad, changed his name to Martin Luther King Sr., and then because Martin was his first son, he changed Martin's name as well. So Martin was really born Michael, but became Martin Luther King Jr. sometime in the mid-1930s. And again, the reason this is significant, when did the Great Depression start? Around that time. So how is it that a brother, a preacher in Atlanta, Georgia, in the Depression, would have enough money to go to Germany? I'm not going to get into the details of that, but that's something you need to be thinking about because that's relevant and that's pertinent. Another thing, his dad was involved in the NAACP. Well, when did the NAACP start? The NAACP started in 1909. His grandfather was also a member of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And what was their goal? Their goal was to try to improve the conditions of life for black Americans in America. To vote, to have equal access to all of this various facilities, and so on and so forth. So that's part of his background. Then you got to think about perception, which is the third component of your personality. Biology, environment, perception. Again, now Martin was a young man growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, with all these powerful people, his parents included, driving him for education. So Martin went to Morehouse College. Not Morehouse High School, Morehouse College at the age of 15. The brother was so academically proficient, he skipped the 9th grade, he skipped the 12th grade, he went to Morehouse College at 15 years old. So with all of the educated and powerful people around him, they were inspiring him to be something and do something. Well, he got to college like most of us, when we first go to college. He played around, didn't really take care of business, and wasn't really sure what he wanted to be. But he decided in his 3rd year, I believe, at Morehouse to become a minister. He wanted to learn the gospel and so forth, but he went into sociology. So he first got a PA in sociology, and he was 19 years old. college graduate, 4-year degree, 19 years old, right? We're talking about 1948. All right, so then his dad, and he taught, he then goes to Crozier Theology School, which is in Chester, Pennsylvania. Now, those of you know about Chester, you know it's close to Philadelphia, and you know that they had had several race riots already in Philadelphia up to that time. And I'm going to talk about more of this later when I get into the section about context. Right now, I'm still dealing with character. So Martin got his degree from Morehouse, sociology, got his bachelor's of divinity from Crozier in Pennsylvania, and I think at this time he's about 23 years old. What happens next? Well, his dad gives him an assistant pastorship at the Ebenezer Church, where he's a pastor. But then Martin gets inspired. He wants to get a doctorate. So he goes to Boston University and gets a doctorate in theology. So now he's about 26 years old. Now, I mean, you guys know, I mean, even today, anyone at 26 years old to be a doctor of anything is a powerful individual. That tells you right there, I don't have to say anything else. You already know this individual had power, internal power. You know what I'm talking about? And so somewhere I read that, you know, God doesn't give you a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power and of love and a sound mind. And this young man obviously was applying that he learned and was taught. So that's his character. Now, the other part I want to make sure I share with you before I get into the context of this is then he married Coretta, because he met her in Boston. So they got married, and just like, where'd she go? Colleen, when she introduced me, marriage is important. You can't really succeed and be successful in life by yourself. You need a partner. And he married her, they had 3 kids, and I'll talk about that more later as we get into it. So then this is around, let's see, that puts us in about 1954 or so. He then gets a job in Montgomery, Alabama, and he becomes the Baptist minister of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. So he's just continuing the legacy. His grandfather on his mother's side, Baptist minister, 1894, Atlanta, Georgia. His father, Baptist minister, 1931, Atlanta, Georgia. He now, in 1954, becomes the Baptist minister at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. That's his character. That's who he is. That's what he became in that short amount of time, 1954. Now, before I get into 1955, as far as it relates to him, I think now we got to talk about the context of Martin and the context of what I believe this event is for. And I think before I go any further, I want to give Rashid and Kaleem a hand and all the people who put this thing together. And they said this is their first annual, and I hope they're going to plan on institutionalize this. You know, education in our community is lacking, has always been lacking, but we need advocates like Rashid and Kaleem to keep this thing moving. So when I talk about context as it relates to Dr. King, what we got to think about is what's going on in America. So before we even get to the 1950s, and that's where I got one of my books, black people got here 3 ways. Africans got here 3 ways. Now the myth that is currently taught in most of the American schools is black people got here, or African people got here as slaves. Well, that's wrong. That's absolutely not true. Fewer black people got here this way than the other way. The second way, explorers. Black people were exploring, African people were exploring the world long before the Europeans got out of caves. They've got a current, and if I had a map of the world, I could show you that the map coming off of West Africa, the currents come all the way to South America, Central America, Mexico, and the eastern part of the United States. Brothers back in the 1300s and 1400s could get in a raft, and the current would carry them. So they were coming long before Columbus. So this was in the 1200s through like the 1600s. So get that book. They came before Columbus. Google it when you get home and go buy it. That'll explain to you that the majority of Africans got to this side of the world by exploration. The second way, or the third way, is indentured servants. So many times, many of our children and many of us were taught that indentured servants were just Caucasians. But that's not true. The majority of Africans, when they first got here after the explorers, they got here this way. An indentured servant meant that you agreed to come to Virginia to pick tobacco, or South and North Carolina to pick rice, and then down in Florida and Texas in there to pick cotton, but you agreed that only for a few years. So guys said, okay, I'll work for you 5 to 10 years. After that, you're free. But not only would you be free, in some cases in Virginia, you would get 5 acres. And if you were able to encourage other people to come, you get 5 more acres. So in this book that I've got right here, many of you may not be familiar with, it's called Before the Mayflower. Okay, it explains about a lot of the black folks who came over here as indentured servants, and they owned hundreds and thousands of acres of land in the south part of the United States. But this is in history you're going to learn. So I'm trying to put this in context as I get to talking about Martin. And in this book, and I thought this was important when I came across it, that in 1644, in the year 1644, the first black legal protest in America. Because what was happening was, as more and more European explorers got here and realized how much money they could make by forcing people to stay, I mean, this 5 to 10 years for some folks extended to 20, right? And then when they figured out the racial issue, then they said, well, wait a minute, we can't keep white folks indentured servants forever as slaves because they know people, right? They can communicate back to the Europeans and get out and get some help. We can't do it to the Native Americans because if they escape, we'll never find them. And they know where to go. They're familiar with the land. But those Africans stand out. They have nobody to call and they have nowhere to go. So that's how that thing got converted. So in the late 1600s and in the early 1700s, that's when you begin to hear about slavery more, forced slavery. So that's the context back here at the beginning. So then after that, you roll up to, I'm gonna just fast forward it. So now you're in the 1800s. And we all know what was happening then, right? That's around the time of the Emancipation Proclamation. That's around the time when it was like, okay, the South and the North weren't agreeing on some stuff. And so they decided, okay, since we can't agree, we're gonna fight. Y'all need to do what we tell you to do, and you have to give up your slaves in the process. The South didn't go for that. But anyway, in 1865, we know that we were free. How many of you all saw that thing on PBS last week, Slavery by Another Name? So many of you know that in some cases, even though slavery ended then, because of things like vagrancy laws and other things, some of our folks were enslaved all the way up to World War II. This is not common knowledge. This history isn't taught anywhere. You got to research on your own to find out what's going on. Now think about this for a minute. I'm trying to put this all into context as we relate it to Brother Martin going forward. After slavery, you got to believe a lot of black folks were leaving plantation trying to figure out, well, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? So if you were caught as a black person in the South and you couldn't prove you had a job, you could be arrested. And if you got arrested under these vagrancy laws, you had to pay like a $50 fine for being arrested, a $100 fine for being incarcerated. Well, if you're a vagrant, you don't have a job, in 1860, 1870, where are you going to get $150? Where is that going to come from? You can't call mama and daddy and talk about, can you bail me out? That's not how that deal went down. So then, railroad companies, steel mills, coal mines, began a partnership with law enforcement in the South to pick up as many vagrants as you could. Now, obviously, if you have to pay back 150, then with railroads, steel mill, coal mine, they'll say, okay, we'll kick you out a few dollars so that we can have that convict for however many months, however many years, etc. Well, what ended up happening? The law enforcement got the money, but they never let the people out. So there are some people in the history of America who were forced into labor, coal mines, steel mills, railroads, and never got out. Slavery, all the way up to World War II. So then, like I said, that's in the 1940s. Now you're talking about things like in 1941, let's see, does anybody know about, and I know you'll raise your hand on this one, and I'm probably misspelling it, A. Philip Randolph. Okay, well, A. Philip Randolph just happened to be one of those brothers in the North trying to fight for the sleeping Pullman porters, right, Pullman porters. So these are brothers on the train, you know, taking care of folks as they rode on the train. Most people, black folks couldn't ride in the sleeping cars, but black folks could take care of people in the sleeping cars. So anyway, he started to unionize. Now the reason this year is important, he was threatening to do MOW, which is a March on Washington. So he was bringing together a whole bunch of folks to say, look, Franklin Roosevelt, I think he was the president at the time, we are going to protest the conditions of our people because we have rights and we should be able to get federal and government jobs. So because he put that kind of pressure on FDR, FDR passed an Equal Employment Act, right? Sometime around in the 40s. So I'm showing you this in the context of what I'm going to bring to you with regards to the content of Martin, because all this stuff was going on. So Martin and Malcolm didn't just pop up all of a sudden in the 60s, demanding for rights, fighting for freedom, ballot of the bullet, you know, I have a dream. There were hundreds of years in this country of black people fighting for their freedom. I know sometimes at the Alpha Academy, some of the young kids ask me, Mr. Taylor, when does the civil rights start? I asked them, what do you guys think? They say, oh, 1960, 1950. No, the civil rights movement started the first time they brought a black man over here in chains against his will and told him he couldn't go back home. The civil rights movement started then, and we have been fighting it ever since. And it's not over. So I know this is fun to watch a lot of these videos and get entertained by a lot of these dynamic speeches, but like I said, as that statute points out, we today are living in the fierce urgency of now. We got a lot of black children right here in this community getting locked up for no reason, not getting their grades, flunking out of school, dropping out of school. I mean, the statistic that I see today in 2012 is probably just as bad or worse than what these brothers saw 100 years ago. So we got to get moving. So anyway, that's the context of Martin. But I think getting back to the character piece, one other thing I think that's important that I didn't mention, and that is, I think she mentioned, or maybe she didn't, I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. Anybody heard of that before? Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. Okay, it was a group of men in Ithaca, New York, Cornell. I just need to share this with you briefly. That started in 1906, okay? So the Niagara movement, some of you may not know what that is, but let's just say that there was a group of black men who got together in the early 1900s and said, look, you guys, we got to do something. This is just crazy what's going on for black people still, 60 years after the Civil War. So in 1906, these brothers in Ithaca, New York, created a fraternity, a brotherhood. Now what's ironic about that is in 1787. How many of y'all heard of Prince Hall Masons? Okay, Prince Hall Masons, another fraternity of black men. A lot of them had a lot to do with the Underground Railroad, which again we'll hopefully talk about in April. But the reason I'm bringing this up is Martin was a member of this organization. I think he pledged around or initiated around in 1954. His father was a member of Omega Psi Phi. Any of you guys heard of Omega Psi Phi? Another fraternity, African American fraternity. His grandfather was a Prince Hall Mason. So again, as I said to you, if I needed to fill up this room, I'm an Alpha. I got another brother in the room that's a Mason. I got another partner that's the imam at the mosque. I got another partner that's the Baptist minister at the church. This library would be packed. You guys understand what I'm saying? That is the context, that is the character that Martin brought to the mix. So with all that stuff going on for black people, and all the background that Martin brought up to the time he married Coretta and became the Baptist minister at Dexter's Avenue Church, now you come into 1955, right? And y'all know what happened in 1955. That's when Rosa decided she wasn't going to give up her seat. Well, where was that? That was in Montgomery, Alabama, where Martin had just so happened to be moved. He moved to Montgomery because that's where Coretta's family was. His family was in Atlanta. But because he got his degree in theology, he wanted to preach and have his own church. He got the church in Montgomery. Him and Coretta moved there. Next thing he knows, Rosa Parks gets arrested. Well, don't forget, as I said to you guys earlier, what is his background? He doesn't come to the table like Johnny come lately, like he's just the Lone Ranger. The brother's already connected. He's connected to the NAACP, not only because of his father in Atlanta, but because of Coretta's parents as well. He's an Alpha. In 1955, Alphas were 50 years in existence. 50 years. Chapters of brothers being created all over the country. Undergraduate, college-educated men. He had a team of Baptist ministers. His partner, one of his main partners, and you guys have probably heard about Ralph Abernathy, he was the minister of another church right down the street. And I think the thing that some people don't recognize in this is the NAACP was started in 1909. Alphas, like I said, was 1906. 3 years later, W.E.B. Du Bois was an Alpha, and he helped start the NAACP. So now you got a connection right there between those two organizations. In 1911, the Urban League was started. One of the founders, Eugene Kinkle Jones of Alpha Phi Alpha, was a founder of the Urban League. In 1911, when the Urban League started, alumni chapters of Alpha were started. So in other words, prior to 1911, 1906 to 1911, you could only create a chapter of Alpha on a college campus. In 1911, Eugene Kinkle Jones said, no, when brothers graduate, they still need to be connected. So that's why when Alima said earlier, Zeta Beta Lambda Foundation, that is the chapter here in Sacramento. It started, ironically, in 1954. 17 black men that were in Sacramento were Alphas in college, but they got here as, doctors, lawyers, engineers, said we need to come together. They came together because Brown versus Board of Education. So you got Brown versus Board of Education. You got brothers who were creating alumni chapters of Alpha all over the country, and one of the brothers in Alpha who was helping to create the alumni chapter also becomes the executive secretary of the Urban League. So for those of you that don't know the history, I got it, but I'm going to share a little bit with you. You got to believe, if an alumni chapter was created in LA of Alpha, there was an Urban League chapter created in LA. If there was an Alpha alumni chapter created in Chicago, you got to believe the Urban League was created in Chicago. But don't forget, we already had them backing us up. So anyway, I'm saying all that to say, so here comes Rosa. And this was no surprise. Those of you know the history of the Montgomery bus boycott. They didn't just wait until Rosa decided she wasn't going to get up. This was a plan. They had already been planning for someone not to give up their seat. The NAACP in Montgomery, they were trying to fight for desegregating facilities and changing this whole paradigm about somebody got to sit on the back of the bus. The sister who first got arrested earlier in 55 was pregnant, wasn't married, so they didn't feel like they could publicly put her on the spot because then somebody would start trying to challenge her lifestyle. Well, Rosa, on the other hand, was, I believe, single at the time, so then they said, okay, well, let's use her. So the Montgomery bus boycott is what set it off. That's how Martin Luther King really got started, because somebody had to speak up about the issue. The infrastructure was already in place. You already had a team of people ready to move, and Rosa was willing to go through the trials and tribulations. When I go back to Brown versus Board, we need attorneys. If we're gonna fight the law, we need somebody that knows how to read and interpret the law. Well, Thurgood Marshall, he's also a member of Alpha Phi. So now you got connections all over the place. So Martin said, all right, y'all, this is what we're gonna do. Nobody get on the bus. Nobody ride the bus until these people let us sit where the heck we want to sit. So for over a year, that's how the deal went down. But people had to ride together, people had to do whatever they had to do, but they worked it out. Okay, you guys remember I mentioned earlier about A. Philip Randolph. So that was successful, right? So coming off of that success, they're like, well, heck, if we can do this in Montgomery, we can do this other places. And then they started to move. Well, that's when that movement created a lot of problems for a lot of people. So then in 1957, and any of you guys heard of the prayer pilgrimage? In 1957, the prayer pilgrimage, 1957. That was like the first kind of black march on Washington, if you will. And A. Philip Randolph, a guy named Rustin, I can't remember his first name. Bayard Rustin, yeah. Now this cat supposedly was a communist, was supposedly part of the socialist movement. Anyway, he was assisting Martin A. Philip Randolph to go talk to the president at that time about the conditions affecting black people in the South. So really, and I don't know time-wise how I'm doing, but let's just say from the prayer pilgrimage to 1968, you got 11 years. You got 11 years left. Why did I say 11 years left? Because Martin gets killed in 1968. So then you got to look at then in terms of the content of the brother. So we talked about his character. We talked about the context of what drove him to do what he did, etc. And I created a kind of like this whole two-page deal of the different things that happened from 1957 to 1968. And I don't know, Rashid's expectation was to go through these line by line, Montgomery, the issue in Montgomery, Albany, Georgia, the instance. Oh, okay, right. The fight in St. Augustine, Florida. I mean, so in other words, I could just list this laundry list of all these different ways in which Martin and the team of black folks was fighting segregation, was fighting to get fair access to jobs and facilities, et cetera, et cetera. But this was some turbulent time. I mean, when you look at these dates, think about it, for example, when I go back, now that I just dawned on me, the other thing that was significant about 1955, Emmett Till. You guys remember Emmett Till? Well, that was the same time Emmett got killed down in Mississippi. So you got Rosa Parks not giving up her seat on the bus, Emmett Till just being mutilated and abused down in Mississippi. His mother opens the casket for all the world to see in Chicago. So now black people are mad. I mean, come on now. I mean, one of the things that I think TV did for us was it exposed for us what was going on. Like, for example, I grew up in Philadelphia, so I knew about the riots, and then I moved to LA, knew about the riots, but I had no idea what was going on in Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi. So when television exposed all this stuff, all heck broke loose. And so Martin, in his nonviolent, civil, disobedient, manner, said, okay, we can't take up guns against these people. I mean, I guess we could try it, but he was saying, okay, let's try this nonviolent, civil disobedient approach. And their thinking was, if we can just bombard the city with so many people on the street, we'll be blocking traffic. There'll be so many of us to lock up in the jails, they ain't gonna have no room to lock us all up in. They started doing sit-ins. They would go to like a Woolworth's restaurant, and they said, no blacks allowed, but 15 or 16 students would come in there and sit down. Now, I mean, I don't like the fact that they got spit on, they got punched, they got plates and food thrown at them, and all that kind of stuff. But it caused the change because it exposed just how brutal, just how unrealistic, just how unreasonable these white people were towards black people down in the South. And so the pilgrimage he did, the other thing that's important in that time frame in 1957, he started the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC. Everybody familiar with that? Okay, now that's talking about now you got 100 Baptist ministers coming together. Now, if the average Baptist minister has a congregation of 100 people, 100 people times 100 ministers, that's 100,000 congregants. That's a lot of people that can move on a lot of different issues. The SCLC inspired SNCC. You guys know a SNCC? Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So what happened there was the students, don't forget, as Martin was becoming a man, he was inspired because of what his father had to go through and what his grandfather had to go through. Well, the teenagers growing up, going to college at this time, they're part of the fraternities and sororities. They're now saying, wait a minute, we ain't got to take this mess. So then they start doing sit-ins and boycotts. Then the other group is the CORE. Now, CORE ties you back to Rustin, ties you back to James Farmer. Now, James Farmer is an interesting character in all this, and he's also interesting in our day and time. How many of you guys saw The Great Debaters? Well, the young brother that spoke upon, should we react to laws that are unfair to us violently or through civil disobedience? That was James Farmer when he was 14 years old. So when he grew up, he got involved with the Congress on Racial Equality, and these guys were the ones that were doing the Freedom Ride. So it's the context of all of these things that I believe that drove Martin to do the things that he did. I think what really makes him unique and powerful, because I know my time is running out, is here it is this thing here. How many of you guys have actually seen the agenda of the March on Washington? Here's the agenda. Now, the March on Washington was for jobs and freedom. Some people think this was only about, black folks getting their rights. But what they were doing was they were trying to make sure that the distribution of wealth was equalized. That's another reason why his assassination was so important and critical, was because once he got the Civil Rights Act passed, the Voting Rights Act passed, Lyndon Johnson even committed to an Economic Opportunity Act, but Martin kept pushing. All of these people together kept pushing for more equitable distribution of wealth. So just like here we are today, 60 years later, you got 1% of the people in America that control 80% of the wealth, and the other 99% of the people fighting over the remaining 20%. So that's what this thing was all about. But what's important for me to share with you all in terms of Martin and the movement was there were 18 presentations at the March on Washington. He was number 16. But the reason he came out of this with so much power was because all the things I shared with you before, but also his I Have a Dream speech, and it was on television. I mean, how many of you guys have gone on Google and Googled like a Malcolm X speech or a Martin Luther King speech? You're going to hear so many other speeches that were probably just as good or better. But at this time, when 500,000 people were in Washington, every television station in the world had this on. That's what created, I believe, the emphasis that put him as this iconic figure in our era. And it's not a bad thing because of what he had done all this time. But I think we need to always keep it in the context that he didn't do it by himself. He didn't do it by himself in Montgomery. He didn't do it by himself in Birmingham. He didn't do it by himself on the March on Washington. He always had a team of people working with him to make things happen. And there's still a whole bunch of people out there making things happen. So I guess my time is wrapping up. And the main thing I want to say, hopefully we'll continue to do this at another time. I want to be a part of the team going forward. And as Harriet Tubman says, that's one of my favorite heroes. Harriet Tubman just says, if you got a goal, anything in life you want to achieve, just put your trust in God and just keep going. And just keep going. Don't ever quit. So thank you very much, and God bless you all. speeches really resonated for me, particularly the how long, not long. And I think as Alima shared with you in my introduction, who I am and what I do, one of the things recently a brother gave me an award. So for those of you not familiar with the MLK Memorial that was built in Washington, D.C., they made a small replica of that memorial and gave that to me. And one of the things it says on there, we are faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. And Dr. King said that in 1967. So I share that with you now because, like I told Brother Rashid, I'm not really an entertainer, I'm an activist. So in other words, the things that you guys seen about Dr. King and what you'll probably see later about Brother Malcolm X, there are many of us that are still doing that right now. And I really appreciate the fact of the time. I don't know about any of you in the room that have a chance to do presentations, but many times you're rushed. You get 5 minutes or 10 minutes to talk about whatever the issue is. But when Brother Rashid said 45 minutes, I felt real comfortable. I said, so I got a lot to say and a lot to share with you all, but I brought my easel board because I like to write as well as I kind of preach and teach going forward. So as she said, you know, just real general, I am a child of God, as I believe many of you in this room are as well. I'm a male, I'm a man. And then lastly, I am a black man. And so with those three issues or essences of who I am, this is what I'm going to speak to as it relates to my brother, Dr. King. But as we go through the outline, the first thing, and since there are young people in the room,
The Valley High North Laguna Library for helping us organize this and put it together. So can we give everybody a round of applause? Thank you. Alhamdulillah. Real quick, I would like to let you guys know the order of events for tonight. Brother Khaled Keyway? That's Brother Khaled right there. One of our 5 pillars. Alhamdulillah. The first thing that we're going to get into that's the video of Dr. King. So once I'm done speaking and everything, we'll show a video. After that, our guest speaker, John Tyler, will come up and speak about Dr. King. After that, we will have an intermission, about 20 minutes, and then follow up by a video of Malcolm X, and then our Amir, where's he at? He's not here. Amir Abdel Malik. He'll be speaking about about Malcolm X. After that, we will have question and answers, and then we'll have our social hour where we can get some cookies. We got some really good Thin Mints. Girl Scout season is here. Alhamdulillah. So once again, could we get a round of applause for yourselves for coming? Thank you, because you guys could be at home relaxing on a Saturday evening. Instead, you're coming out here to join us. One thing I would like to bring to notice to Mr. Taylor is that he's been married for 30 years. 5 children. Yes. I don't know about you guys. For me, my personal opinion, that's the greatest accomplishment.
I want you to always remember the 5 W's. I learned this from the Panthers back when I was a kid in Los Angeles. You always got to know the 5 W's. Who, what, why, when, where. Those are the 5 fingers. So when you seen the brothers putting their fists like this, you didn't know about the 5 W's that they talked about. But when they close their fist, it's the how. That's what black power is. You got to know the 5 W's, and then once you know that, then you put up your fist and how, and we'll explain to you that as we go forward with today's presentation. So with that kind of overview and outline, as I thought about the 45 minutes, I thought about how do we talk about Brother King and all that he's done in 45 minutes? So I figured, okay, the best way to do that is to break it up into 15-minute increments. We need to first talk about his character. Who is he? And how did he become who he was? We need to put things in context. What was the time that he was living? What had happened before he came into the world, and what allowed him or inspired him to do what he did? And then that is, in fact, what then represents the content. So those are the three things that I want to cover for you today. Now, his character. Now, many of you may have taken psychology, and I think it's important, again, because I think as we talk in sessions like these, we need to make sure we're clear on what's going on. Everybody is composed of these three essences: your biology, your environment.
Any man can have, and women, let's not forget about his wife. Mr. Taylor has a BA in business management. He has a master's in economics, and he serves on the board from Civil Service Management for the state of California. He's a board of director of the St. Hope Public School, which is located in Oak Park. That's where I grew up. He is on the board of directors for Lambda Foundation. He is an active member of the Sacramento's Mayor's Stand-Up Initiative Program. Okay. Also, he is the co-founder of the Alpha Academy Youth and Parent Mentoring Program, Brothers of Kahumba. Alhamdulillah. It's a rites of passage for middle school boys, which we really need that, alhamdulillah. He also is a co-founder of the Concerned African American Parents Advocate Group of Elk Grove. She's been married for 30 years. That's about, yes, family. He's a co-president of the annual African American Young Males Conference with the 101 Black men of Sacramento for the past 15 years. Alhamdulillah, that is great. Once again, could we get a round of applause for Mr. Taylor? Our guest speaker.
The speeches, as I was studying and preparing for tonight, those three: environment and your perception. Your biology is, in my case, I'm black. My hair is somewhat thin. My pigmentation is, what it is. I'm a certain height. I'm a certain weight. And everyone in this room has a biology from your ancestors and from your parents. Dr. King's the same case. His environment. Where did he grow up? Dr. King was born in 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. 1929, Atlanta, Georgia. (1929) in the deep south of America. Segregation. In 1929, when Dr. King was born, there were 100 reported lynchings of black people just in Georgia. We don't want to talk about Mississippi, Alabama, South and North Carolina, Texas, Louisiana. In Georgia alone, in the year he was born, 100 black people were lynched. And we're not talking about just hanging from a tree. We are talking about people that were literally set on fire in some cases. Literally set on fire for the entertainment of people in that community. He was born in that year, in that place. Some other things about his environment. His father was a pastor, preaching the gospel. His mother was the daughter of a pastor who preached the gospel, and that's Baptist. So he grew up in a very strong Christian-orientated household, but in a very racially segregated environment. Both of his parents were educated. Both were